and welcome back to the Better Advertising with Better Media podcast. I am incredibly excited today to have one of my favorite LinkedIn friends. I would say at this point, we could be friends. I think we've been connected for a while. We have on the incredible Darren Silverman, Vice President of E-commerce Insights for PetMate. Darren, I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on there. And it is great I think we've talked in person before and on Zoom before, but it's great to have this time together and get to see each other in person here and talk about the fun channel we're all part of and the community we're part of. So really appreciate having me on.
It's a small space, I would say. I think you and I have been chatting about all the mutual connections we've had, all of the overlap with the LinkedIn community. And I wasn't able to find the exact date, but I think we've been connected for at least a few years now, maybe. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I'd say we'd probably go back at least 3 years or more, I'm sure. That would sound about right. I think your content really just started showing up in my feed. So it just, again, goes back to your LinkedIn influencer status. It just started showing up in my feed. And I've really gotten to this point, and I've used this as a joke with my team and even with our leadership. If I could find great information from smart people for free, I'm going to always jump on that. And you fall into the bucket of great information from a smart person. And so far, you haven't charged me for any of it. So that's been really good.
That's actually a fun concept. I've had quite a few people reach out to us and ask why we do it for free. But I think that's almost, I don't know if it's a generational thing or if it's just the internet, but if we don't do it, someone else is. And I would much rather maintain our authority in the space, being first to market with updates and connecting fantastic people. That's what this podcast is about. Because if we don't do it, someone else is. And I also think that you have to have that direct connection to the industry because e-commerce moves so fast. And Darren, you were just mentioning how long you've been in the space. I would love to hear a little bit more about your background and how you got started and how you got thrown into the e-commerce world.
Yeah, it's an interesting path, probably not too different than some others who were in it at the beginning, I suppose. During my time, which we didn't actually touch on this, I lived in Bentonville for about 5 years, and I know you're from there. And while I was there leading the Walmart business for Crayola, Walmart.com was trying to expand, their toy space. And they were looking at Crayola and they wanted to have more of a legitimate assortment. And through our buyers, they were still very separate teams, but they did reach out and come talk to them about doing business on Walmart.com. I knew what e-commerce was. I knew a little bit about the channel, but it really was not part of my world. That was very much a mass market. Like that was my claim to fame, driving business on channels like Walmart, Toys R Us, those places. And in meeting with them, I wasn't sure if it was really a sales call, if it was I'm pitching them, or I didn't know what it was. To the point I even brought samples with me to my first meeting, which I always still find to be funny because the buyer thought it was funny. We don't care about the samples. Like we just want to do more business. I'm like, you just want to do more business together. These people leading e-commerce actually need product to sell. Like they're looking for partners, they're looking for folks that are going to help them hit their numbers and hit their goals. And that's really how I got start in it. And I would say that meeting was probably in 2009. And that goes way back. So that was a great experience and learned actually quite a bit about the channel from Walmart, which I know most people don't go that direction. They start on Amazon. And then about 2 years later, and I moved into a corporate role at Crayola, a similar process was happening. Amazon was buying from us. They were set up as a customer, but we really had no direct plan or business development goals with them. But all of a sudden they went from buying, X amount one year to buying 4 times that much the next year. And so I was like, maybe we should pay attention to these guys. So same thing, kind of a strategic team we put together, went out to Seattle and met with a group. And they basically laid it out like, hey, toys is our next big frontier. You guys are a huge brand. We really want to partner and grow the business. And how do we grow it? And that kind of, for me at that point, I've gone only brief instances in my time since that, which was again about 2012, that I haven't had my hands on Amazon in one form or another, different companies I've worked for. So, but it was that interesting approach to those of us that have been in it so long, is we go back to the time when they're like begging us for product and begging us for those things. It's a different world now, and obviously scaled in a very different space now, where we are today.
That's incredible. I want to highlight, bring samples to the meeting, because I think it's a really important mindset to have that I've been in solely Amazon for the most part for 7 years, and I still show up to RFPs, to QBRs, to every acronym possible, and I don't fully know what to expect. And I think that's really important because there's not a level playing field in e-commerce. I think that the differentiation across brands, I think the differentiation across verticals, across organizational charts and structures has really caused us from an employee perspective to really have to embrace the mentality of just figuring it out. And to your point of, I brought samples to the meeting, you still came in prepared. You didn't exactly know what to expect, but I think that could be highlighted across the whole journey. If you're going to succeed in the e-commerce space, you succeed by being naive, almost by not knowing what to expect, by going into the meeting with an open mind, but just knowing that you're going to have to figure it out, that there's not a playbook for success. And if there is a playbook for success, I will bet $100 right now that's going to change within 2 weeks when there's a small API update or Amazon and Walmart decide to go to a whole new direction because they can do that.
Right. That's a great call. The be naive is a really great way to put it. I've probably never thought of it in that regard, but I think in a lot of consumer goods sales, by the way, I think naivety plays a big role, because when you know too much, you tend to focus on what doesn't work. Like, what mostly are the things that don't work, so you avoid them versus just taking your swing at that and just trying. And I mean, the sample thing is great, because that first meeting, it was like, hey, this is all about business. But in the future, in many years of sitting there with, the Amazon Toys team in Seattle, we would bring our biggest launches for Q4 to those meetings and put them on the table, because we were trying to sell them on picking our items to be on their top 100 toy list, or any of those things that Amazon was doing back then. I know they still do. I'm not on toys anymore, but that we would still go in and sell our products. And you could tell that they weren't used to people doing that, but they kind of loved it. Like, they loved the fact that we actually were trying to get them excited about a widget that in their mind is just an ASIN number with dollars attached to it. But
100%.
you want them to be passionate about your product and your brand and your business, if you can.
It's such a small detail, and really highlights that even in the virtual world, the e-commerce world, the post-COVID world, relationships still matter. And it's something we've seen across the board for the majority of our clients where it makes sense. We try to fly out, do in-person QBRs. We try to do, holiday planning together in office, because even if everyone is fully remote, as Better Media is, it's a level of passion and buy-in when you enjoy who you're working with and you can understand why the product is better. And I think that's a really important aspect to note. And we were just talking about like KPIs in general when it comes to Amazon and channel management. But at the end of the day, a lot of our business is still people to people. And that's, I think, reflected in how you've chosen to portray the brands with the relationships with Amazon and Walmart in both of those stories.
Yeah, I think the people side and having the right people not only on your team, but on your agency partner side is really important. For most part, my team here actually goes back to people I worked with back in those early days.
But it's a small community in Bentonville, and I always find overlap with the people on teams who lived in Bentonville.
Yes, I've overlapped there. But my person who runs our Amazon business, our VP of Amazon, Pam Anderson, she was actually a merchandising manager. She worked beside our buy at Amazon back with Crayola when we were first starting our business. So she was the one explaining to us what AMS was. I think it was called AMS back then. And what content should look like. And she was fantastic. And she's actually worked with me now at 2 different companies. So she's here with me at PetMate. Ed, who's our Amazon National Account Manager, was our Crayola National Account Manager. So we do kind of follow each other around, because it's the people, you see how they work with their customer, you see how they run their business. And it's the balance of, you don't want to go 100% robotic into the data, even though we love our data and we ultimately are dictated by it. You want those folks that can manage both the customer and internal relationships as well, and agency relationships as well. An agency should never feel like they're just, I'm sure you'll appreciate this, just executing tasks because we pay you and we ask for it, right? You should want to do it. Like, an old manager of mine, it was amazing back in my Bentonville days, was like you have their hands because of your job, because of your title. But if you treat people a little differently, you'll have their hearts and their minds, and you'll be amazed at the work you get. And I needed that coaching at that point in my career. And it stuck with me ever since, because you realize you get a ton more out of people and not actually asking them and telling them what to do. You get a lot more helping them understand the bigger picture and letting them realize, like, oh, this is the right thing to do. That's not very e-commerce focused, but still, it's important to me.
The fundamentals are there across the board. It's doing business with great people. And I think How to Make Friends in the Digital Age, I believe it's Dale Carnegie, was one of the first books I read directly out of college. And it seems so basic, like how to make friends. But there were so many concepts in that book that I think have really helped me become a better leader and manager. Building the emotional bank account. It's so easy to get caught up in like what you're asking for, what you're taking from someone. But if you really start considering the emotional bank account, what are you withdrawing from the people you're working with? Or when is the right time to withdraw? That was a really cool concept that I think has helped me in many areas of the life, because it's not just the emotional bank account, it's resource allocation. It's figuring out, we were just talking about e-commerce. You cannot be a subject matter expert in everything e-commerce. There's no SMEs for e-commerce, in my opinion, because e-commerce trickles down into platforms, into the insights, into the creative, into the algorithm aspect. And it's almost too much to keep up with. And Darren, how many brands do you all have under your umbrella, or high level, a decent amount?
We technically have about 23 brands. We probably put a lot of emphasis at about 10 or 12. That have some significant volume, and then we've got a clear 3 or 4 that are like the true head of our assortment. But all those other brands have at least a few ASINs, our heroes in them, which it's hard to know all that level of product knowledge. To your point, to be a pet mate SME is very difficult.
100%. I mean, even just taking top brand Chuck It. I'm a very big fan, primarily from dealing with slimy tennis balls. One brand to be successful, it's like you have to understand so many different verticals. So what does that look like for you? You're building a team, you're in charge of all e-commerce and insights. That's a very large umbrella. What are the best ways you found to be successful? How have you balanced that resource allocation, knowing what bets to take and where to invest your time and energy?
That's a good question. It's a challenge. It's probably a daily. Sometimes we look at that on a daily basis. And usually, it's a bigger strategic decision, setting priorities. From a branding standpoint, certainly looking at things like as detailed as, okay, what's your product mix? What's your profit mix? What's working? Where as a whole company. Now, I don't dictate the whole PetMate strategy as a company. So what brands are we going to lean into? So making sure you're supporting corporate objectives, but then also which are giving the most kind of bang for the buck for the work. So you called out Chuck It. It's a great example. It's one of our largest brands. It's our largest brand on Amazon for sure. And every time we invest and give a little more goodness to that brand, it sort of gives it back, and we see those results. Now we can't only focus on that brand because it's not our entire business. And I can tell you there are teams and agencies that wishes all they had to do was work on Chuck It because it's the dream brand now. But definitely looking at the quality of the assortment, the margins they deliver, a lot of the data. We do. I mentioned earlier we work with Commerce IQ. So on the Amazon side, we do go deep into the data and look at which we have brands that we don't maybe pay a lot of attention, segments of brands. So we have a lot of categories as well that we don't maybe pay a lot of attention to. But when you look at the data, it's like, wow, these convert phenomenal. Why aren't we driving more traffic? And then so we add money to that. We do things. And then you'll have someone eventually look and go like, why are we spending money on like that? Because look what happens when we do. So that priority is important. And then internally, because of how diversified our portfolio is as a company, we have to sort of educate all the individual pieces in the company on the Amazon business. Specifically, I'll focus on Amazon for the purpose of this, to get their support back so they understand the why behind what we're trying to do and what we're asking for. And that's a lot of, cadence of monthly meetings broken down to the individual product managers almost, because that's really how we have to talk about the business. Whenever we talk about it as a macro, like from a leadership perspective, I never feel like I could do our business justice because there's so much nuance and there's so much detail going into the lower, the lower parts of the product funnel, just like the lower parts of the purchase funnel. There's so much going on down there that we can't lose sight of that, and we can't oversimplify. And I know everyone, we live in a day and age where everybody wants to oversimplify, but we just can't get away with that right now. You really have to know those details. But I did want to touch on your comment about the SMEs and ecom, because we talked a little earlier about agencies and a little debate I recently saw, and I hope I might bring this up, but a debate that I saw that came up on LinkedIn about, I think it was someone lobbying for the fact that you should be 100% outsourced for e-commerce, but I can't really remember. I'm sure it was someone that owns a 100% outsourced e-commerce firm that was posting this. And there was a lot of great dialogue in the comments on this. And I can't really remember if I chimed in, but I remember for years now, I've looked at it as, I want a solid in-house team especially a company like PetMate, where our catalog is so complicated. We just talked about that. All the brands, all this detail, all these nuances. Anytime we have an outside firm do an audit, it's kind of fun to sit there and let them go through it, although it's also painful because they lose all the nuance when you just look at the data, right?
Yes.
But if you are only in-house, there's so much advancements and so many things that are happening, like the comment you just made earlier, like if you had a playbook 2 weeks from now, the playbook might be meaningless, right? I think you lose the ability to really keep pace of the cutting edge. And I think as an agency leader yourself and your team that works for you, if you're not on the absolute front edge of what hasn't even happened yet, you're probably going to lose clients, right? So you've got to be there. And I think for companies like ours, we always need partners like that to keep us well educated and in the loop, because we can only learn so much ourselves. So
100%. I think I would also say it's so dependent on the talent you have. And I think that's an area that people forget. Now, again, maybe I'm naive. I'm a young CEO, but there's been times where it's like we've had a specific hire come onto our team and we've slightly changed the direction that we're going with our company because that person was so excellent in the vertical that we could fully trust them to take on that area of business. If you happen to stumble across the most passionate pet owner who was also incredible at Amazon advertising operations, then maybe you do bring that in-house and you take care of them. But I think it's important to at least have, whether it's the Darren on your team, for those in the audience, who's constantly keeping up with the industry updates and sending them out, sending the better media post, if it be, to their internal team members. But you have to have that balance because we still audit so many brands who have really random misconceptions because they've never brought in an external partner. They'll be like, oh, sponsor brands don't work, or DSP doesn't work for me because I had one bad experience. And while I value them being that close to the business, sometimes it is too siloed. And going back to, there's so many different areas of opportunity and success with e-commerce. You need to have that balanced aspect of the internal team who can maybe be hands-on keyboard and really keep up to date with the nuances, but also that outer lens from the industry experts in the space. And thankfully, we have a really strong network of those people on LinkedIn, which helps provide some of that balance, I'd say.
I think the outside resources are better equipped to test things like that. So say if you wanted to learn more about how DSP could help your business, it's a lot when you have an internal person that's already managing internal forecasts and all these other, like, just day-to-day working for it, versus asking your agency partner, say, hey, can we run a DSP test on this for this time frame for this objective, and we'll go get you the creative and bring us back the data and the results. Like, being able to outsource that type of thing to me is so critical, because yes, you could have the right skill internally to do it, but what critical tactical operational function am I taking somebody off of to go focus on that test versus someone who's dedicated to it in an agency? I think we've gotten a lot more accomplished because we choose to go that hybrid route.
So we've talked lightly about, being a company driven by M&A and the complexities that come with acquisitions of a similar product type, I would say, or a similar audience that you're targeting. How have you managed that? There's a lot of overlap, I would assume, even from something as simple as DSP allows you to target certain audiences, and you have a lot of overlap audiences being ran across random accounts. And we don't have to get super technical here, but I've talked to a lot of brands that are running into similar issues. They throw out AMC as the fix. I don't think there's a perfect AMC fix yet. I don't think anyone is that in the weeds or technical yet. How do you view management of that?
I would say we merged with a big company in our industry about almost 3 years ago now. And upon that merger, we were doing business very differently when it came to e-commerce. And one of the challenges we saw in that team structure is they were running all their different brands as sort of brand teams, brand managers on, say, the Amazon business. And they were all really talented group, but they were all individually pushing to do the best for their brand. Mm-hmm. And some of their brands competed with products and the overlap you're talking about. And the inefficiencies, became pretty obvious pretty quickly. So when we brought everything together, we kind of eliminated that structure and kind of looked at more the vertical of the channel and the business, looking at the total set of data. And this is where a really good SaaS partner came into play. And then we did end up, going with Commerce IQ solution, because they had the ability to take, and we were dealing with I don't know, 8 different vendor central accounts plus multiple seller central accounts. And they had the ability to at least bring all of that, both sales and advertising data into one place and let us actually evaluate the overlap, essentially like what terms are we bidding on and who's the most
Yeah.
productive. Because we have a brand called Hyperpet. It's a great brand. It's not Chuck It, but it's a great brand. So term for term, I don't want Hyperpet competing with Chuck It when I know Chuck It's going to have the highest level of conversion, going to have the highest. So we basically start separating out down almost to the search term level, to the targeting level, the types of media we run. It really was a data driven project, and we couldn't have done it without somebody like Commerce IQ to at least harness the data together. And what we've seen, and this kind of goes back to the prioritization we talked about earlier, the best stuff rose to the top, so because the performance, like I mentioned earlier, is so strong when we get behind Chuck It, little by little, more and more budget has gone to that line, and we've kind of shifted, and we focus on different areas and parts of the business and some of the other brands. But it was a lot to manage and a lot to unwind at first, and it has definitely caused some of the brand sale. Certain brands have gotten smaller through that optimization process, but when you look at all the other KPIs, it makes sense. That trend makes sense, and it's the right decision.
So you had mentioned kind of just long-term goals, short goal, term setting. Do you guys start as organization level? You have your teams segmented from an organizational level, no longer in that brand silo strategy, which probably does cause some of that internal competition that you are seeing. How quickly do you change objectives? How fluid are you when it comes to like budgeting or just advertising objectives, things like that? Do you set, 1 to 2 core KPIs on a yearly, quarterly basis, and then you allow more flexibility internally across brands? How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's probably the trickiest component to manage as an e-commerce leader in non-e-commerce organization, right? If you're e-commerce native, you live and die by that real time shifting and changing. But in a company that's a little more on the traditional side, your budget, your targets, you're going to spend, that's kind of locked in for the fiscal year. And as you see opportunity, sometimes you can go and create a story or a case for additional budget and to lean in a little more as long as you can deliver the ROI. But more often than not, within your portfolio, you're having to make those choices. You're having to say, okay, well, there's this opportunity to invest and do more and deliver more on this part of our business. But we're going to have to make the choice to back off on this other piece. That we do in fairly real time. And we try and, let's say, probably don't make changes every week. We probably look at things weekly and then figure out each month what that new, if we should make any adjustments or changes. We're constantly adding and taking away and trying DSP or trying an incremental spend on a certain product line just to see if we can hold our returns, right? Can we drive greater sales, spend more money, and not like see a huge dip in ROAS or something like that? Can we get some incrementality out of it? So we are looking at all that in real time, but it's all against pretty static long-term, full year budget that we're trying to manage as we go through it. We did have some success creating a story for added promotional investment toward the end of last fiscal year and some added ad spend just based on where we were in the year, and said, hey, we see opportunities, should we go for it? We got some blessing to go for it. And that's not always easy to happen in an enterprise scale organization. It's complicated internal story to manage. And sometimes it's hard for the team because they're so e-commerce focused that they don't understand. Like, well, if we're seeing something, why wouldn't we just go do it? I'm like, well, we can just go do it.
An area that I'm curious to see whether or not e-commerce forces changed on traditional organizations, or if the traditional organizations are going to force e-commerce to slow down and be a little bit more stable.
That is, I believe there's like everything, there'll probably be a balance in there, but I see this often and I believe it now. I think at this point in my career, that I see a lot of messaging around, the future CMOs and the future CEOs are probably all going to be coming from the e-commerce channel and big organizations over time. And it's hard to picture that in companies where e-commerce is still less than maybe 20% of sales or whatever. But when you look at traditional retail, all of the advancements in traditional omnichannel retail are on the e-commerce side of the business. So the only reason calling on Walmart today is different, whatever it was 10, 15 years ago when I lived in Bentonville, because of Walmart.com.
Yeah.
And because of the emphasis, their metrics, their scorecards, all these things are still the same. What they do in store, their stores are a little cleaner and nicer. They've done some different merchandising strategies, but that goes by whoever's running merchandising, right? But the true enterprise difference of working with Walmart is all about the .com business.
Yeah.
I'm not financially the leader of the Walmart business. That's part of our national account team. But I am side by side with my peer who has national accounts. I have a person on my team who's responsible for omni-channel business development. She sits in almost every Walmart meeting. She directly works with the Walmart Connects team. Any question related to e-commerce, she's on it. We're all part of the JBP together with Walmart. It dominates the conversation with them. So I would say most CEOs in CPG right now of our generation, which is mostly most of the CEOs now are probably about my generation of consumer goods, they know Walmart really well because they've all grown up selling to Walmart at one point in their career, because you almost can't be a CEO if you haven't gone through that chair. I guess some probably are, but shouldn't be. But erase that, delete that part out. Anyway, the next generation of Walmart leaders coming up are going to be so e-commerce savvy because they're being forced to, right? So where do they want to take their career from their Walmart experience, right? Do they want to go and become an e-com leader, a role like mine, or do they want to stay on more the omni-channel side? I mean, it's the industry is changing, and I do think the influence coming from e-commerce will be the more powerful wave of change, with the other side of it just probably pushing things like accountability and profitability and some of those metrics that are more traditional that won't ever go away.
100%. And I think just watering that down even further, the industry is changing quick. And you had kind of made the comment of like calling on Walmart, the stores are a little bit cleaner, merchandising's a little bit different, but not a lot has changed. And for one, I will say growing up in Bentonville, I had unrealistic not expectations, but if you're in Bentonville, everyone knows Store 100 is flawless, incredibly clean. Now that I live in Florida, I realize that is not true for every single Walmart store. So for those who have heard me be on my pedestal about how incredible Walmart is, I lived in Bentonville. That was the difference. But I will say that I think e-commerce changes so quickly, and it's really causing the talent to change. You even think about like social media and how quickly trends now change. Like whenever you think of the 90s, I think there's very certain styles and traits that come out. 80s, you have big hair. 90s, you have chokers. 2000s, right? If you think about like the Gen Z generation and the trends throughout that, it's so quick. They come and they go, and one thing goes viral on TikTok and it completely changes what outfits are being worn to school the next day. And I think that's going to be a requirement to be successful in any industry in the future. And it's still going to be like tried and true, who can stick at it the longest, but also who can adopt that open-mindedness to learn and stay up to date with the changing trends.
Yeah, I've had a great example. I've had 3 meetings this week just about TikTok. Where we are with our shop, working with a consultant now to make some business out of that. There's definitely a pet volume starting to happen there.
Yeah.
But even a year ago, running all this e-com business, I wouldn't imagine the amount of hours of a single week I would spend talking about not TikTok posting and social media. Like TikTok is a revenue channel.
Yes.
It's basically a DTC revenue channel. Like it's amazing. And then some of the other conversations we're having with other platforms right now, it's going to be a while before they're anything of scale.
Yep.
But if you're not there, are you really present in the market? Like if you're not on TikTok, so you have a chance for something to go viral, how much are you missing out on? And right now we see occasionally one of our items will go viral on TikTok, just some brand. We're not even paying influencers. I want to see someone makes a great video with one of our products. And because we didn't have a good a TikTok store set up at all, we'll see a spike in volume on Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's pretty wild when you can start tying it together and go, okay, like we're like creating friction. It's like not even easy for someone to go do this. And we're not even incentivizing the person.
And they're still going
and it's
to
still
Amazon.
happening.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't we doing more here? So we obviously realize it's a big opportunity, but again, it's about the resources and managing those verticals. And I have that sits with our DTC leader. So that's part of his world because it's really powered by our Shopify store and all that. So, it's really, becomes his business essentially. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's like trying to keep up with all that and pretend that you really know all of it and understand it. Because I can tell you I understand it, but there's still components of it where I'm like, okay, I got to get
Fake it till you make it.
No one's written the book yet. No one's written that book yet.
Powers, Curie Masters, I think you two are typically leading the way when it comes to the book on success. So we'll be waiting on one of them to release a really good book on TikTok Shop. But it's all a timing game. I mean, even for us, as we've expanded outside of Amazon into retail media in general, we're now Walmart, Instacart, kind of all the key players. I've been holding back on the TikTok investment with my team. My team would love to, right? They're so excited. They see it being posted. And I'm like, I don't know, because from a resource allocation standpoint, it's so much work to learn a new platform and to dive in. And from a management perspective, like, I don't know if the juice is quite there yet. There isn't a consistent enough playbook on the agency side, in my opinion, to make it worth my investment. That being said, I do see some of my competitors in the space, or just agencies we're friends with, that have launched this vertical and first to market, leading content, leading education, and they're getting flooded with clients. But it's just the inconsistency and the lack of stability in it makes it hard to invest. And it's like, that's going to be something I think we're constantly going to be up against in the future of the space.
I think there are agencies that are running it as like a little, I always use this term skunk works, which nobody knows what that means, but we have to be close to Lockheed Martin here, where I live in Texas. So they have a skunk works division that's headquartered here, where they make like really cool planes that none of us ever see or hear about. So that's where I learned the term. But the skunk works kind of team is sort of like, go work on something that may not be very profitable, it may not be very executable, but it's siloed off in a way. So it's not like taking from your core client support, right? Your core client team. And I do think I'm seeing some agencies treating TikTok about that way, like that, where it's kind of like a separate group. They're investing because they've had to hire people, but they're definitely not distracting from your core business and your core client. And it's sort of like a bet that eventually it'll make some money, that you can earn enough in fees, because that's really what it is. It's a lot of work, but there's still only going to be so much volume initially, right? And how do you turn that into revenue?
I love that. I may have to reach out to you after the podcast and get some connections on the TikTok side to have them on the podcast, because it's something that I'm 100% interested and excited about. And I like the way you positioned it. Of you're building a segment of the company similar to our whole conversation with Amazon, that they have separate KPIs and goals for. So that way you don't have unrealistic expectations around success or investment into that vertical.
Exactly. And I think a lot of our CPG companies should be doing the same thing, quite frankly. Whether it's a vertical, whether it's, I always think of it in terms of product. Like, I always wish we had a team like that here at PetMate that just worked on stuff that we just wanted done, that doesn't support any brand goal or anything, but it's just, we just think we could sell it, right? Especially in the e-commerce, right? We have a lot of interesting competition we deal with every day on e-com, and going against them wouldn't necessarily be like within a brand halo of anything we do, but there's dollars out there. There's a chance to drive some revenue. So yeah, I love the model. If I ran a company, I would always have a team dedicated to something like that. But whatever, whether it's product, whether it's verticals, like it would change. That project may be different each year.
I love that. Like, that's kind of the mentality we've tried to approach just within the company. We're a relatively low systems oriented company compared to a lot of agencies in the space, primarily because we read the book No Rules Rules. And it's all about the Netflix mentality of just hire incredible people, be very candid and transparent around the vision, and allow them to do what they do best to accomplish that vision. And it's something that we've really embraced. And we use systems and processes when it comes to things that we need to be highly repeatable and consistent, style of campaigns being launched and things like that. But for our team, if someone comes to me tomorrow and says, hey, I'm really interested in TikTok, I want to go launch this, I would 100% be like, go do it. And that mentality is something I think is really going to be a game changer. And being able to incorporate that in your actual org chart that'd be a big investment. I like it. When we launch this department, I'm going to do a little whole marketing guideline and give a big shout out to you, Darren.
I could use it. I could use the credit. Why not?
Hey, that being said, I do want to pause real fast and say, everyone who doesn't follow Darren on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. Even if it's as simple as seeing your commentary under some of the experts in the space, you always do a fantastic job of being very candid and transparent around your thoughts, what's worked for you all. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to that, because one, it's how we got connected, but two, you're providing a lot of value in the space.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Before we wrap things up, I did want to ask a quick question, because I noticed your books in the background and we talked about it earlier. Are there any just books that you recommend for people in the space or me to listen to or take a look at?
For me, some of the recent ones, Fat Stack Winner Sells All by Jason Del Rey. I think you've probably read it already, but if you are, and I actually bought copies of it for our Walmart team, who doesn't work for me here, PetMate, and my Amazon, and my e-com team and our omni-channel folks. Because I'm like, one, it's like, I feel like I'm looking at my resume when I read the book, because I lived through so much of that. But at the same time, it really lets you understand where you are. The whole comment I made earlier about how intense the Walmart.com conversations are today when you're sitting in a room with Walmart. that if your only understanding of dealing with Walmart is from 10 years ago, you would be like blown away by that. And that book explains why, right? It explains why Amazon is where they are, which is a lot more well known. But I think understanding that side of the Walmart business and Walmart's passion around getting it right on the .com side, I think really becomes very obvious when you read that book, and it makes a ton of sense. And Jason did a really, really great job with that one. Then from like a team leadership standpoint, I like to read a few of those as well. So I think I'm about to start on the top there, start with why, because that's when the whole company, we're all going to read as a company together. So that's kind of something our CEO just recently gave us all. But I think Simon, most of us have watched his TED Talks and videos on LinkedIn and all those things. And so much of that came from that book. So really great. And then one I have not actually read yet, but I'm deciding to read books I haven't read yet, that I want to read is Unreasonable Hospitality.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Did you read it?
I did. Yes.
Yes. Well, awesome.
Jess just posted about it on LinkedIn, and she had recommended it to us because she leads a lot of our sales kind of client success functions. And I came from bartending background. I actually used to bartend at Pinnacle Country Club growing up. And a lot of the mentalities from working country club life, I feel like has been built into the company. And I love how well they structured that book. It's fantastic.
So I was at a conference back in January, a pet industry conference, and Will Gardia was the speaker. So he's the one who wrote the book. And he was the speaker. And I love the restaurant industry. I worked the restaurant industry all through college as well. And I always had a passion for it. Almost thought I'd open one someday. And then this happened. So,
That's my retirement goal, bartend somewhere.
You and me both. If you could find me the job somewhere on a beach in Florida, Destiny, I'll be right there with you.
I'll see what I can do. We can talk.
My wife already knows. Yeah. A night job, bartending, day job. I just want to be the guys that grab the chairs off the beach, just the rental chairs,
Yes.
Living the dream. But he spoke at this conference, and I never heard of the book. Completely blew me away. We were just starting to watch The Bear, which if you assume, I'll give another plug there for Hulu. And I realized how much of pieces of The Bear came from Will. It came from that story. There's overlap. He's a contributor for sure. And he's actually the whole thing just stuck to me to the point that I wrote up a whole write-up of his speech that I gave to my team. I'm like, this was amazing. And my questions to him, because we had a chance for Q&A, was like, has any company put this into play internally? Because for me, the vision of that unreasonable hospitality is how do you use that concept for how you work cross-functionally and internally in your organization to just go above and beyond for your cross-functional peers. So then they go beyond for you. Like, does it become contagious in an organization if that's how you act? So we'll just redeem Echoways, Ecommerce for CEOs.
Big shout out to that one. 100%. One of my friends just finished that one as well. We got at our last conference and chatted with Dean for quite a bit. And it was pretty good from everything I've heard.
I read it with the intent, and I probably will still, was to buy it for our C-suite, but I wanted to read it first and see if they, would it make sense? And I think Dean did a very good job capturing the concepts at a very high level that, somebody who's not super close to the everyday of the business can read that and understand a little bit more. And I think that's really was his goal, I think, with that, with the writing of it. So he accomplished that one. And I think Kiri actually helped him a good bit with the editing, and a few other folks did as well. So
I love it. Well, if the podcast wasn't enough for everyone, I think we just gave a bunch of homework on some of the different areas you can learn and kind of multiply everything we've talked about today. And I wanted to kind of wrap things up because I know Darren and I have already been talking for an hour, and I think we could probably talk for 4 to 5 more hours. And it makes sense. We had very similar backgrounds across hospitality and Bentonville and team management and relationships, but I just want to say thank you so much, not only for, again, all the value you provide the community, but taking the time to hop on this podcast. Super excited to have you on. And hopefully we get to chat some more in the future.
For sure. And thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, because it's always flattered because you've seen some of the list of the guests you've had. And thank you for everything you share. We talked about it earlier, but really the amount of content and thought leadership you share out there in LinkedIn as an influencer, and I will back you up with your sister. You are a LinkedIn influencer. Is amazing, and you really do help make us all better and make us think with your posts and content. I love that. So thank you so much for having me, and thanks for that.
Well, thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your week.